In the world of quiet money and loud consequences, Alexander Thorne understood one thing. Control was the only currency that never depreciated. It bought silence, loyalty, and a penthouse view of a city that would eat you alive if you blinked first. He just never planned on Olivia Chen making him blink. Chapter 1. The air in Le Basilique shifted the moment he entered, not with sound, but with pressure. Two of his security details melted into the mahogany-paneled walls as Alexander Thorne moved through the low-lit dining room. He was here for a transactional conversation with a hedge fund manager whose debts were being creatively restructured, a meeting that shouldn't have happened at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. 10 steps in, his world tilted on its axis. There, at his preferred corner banquette, the one he used for discussions requiring absolute privacy, sat Olivia. His executive chief of staff. She was laughing. The sound was unfamiliar, soft, unguarded, real. It wasn't the polite, professional chuckle she used when he closed a brutal deal, or the tense exhale when he pushed her too hard. This was warmth, radiating from her in waves that he felt across the room. She wore a simple emerald silk dress, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, catching the candlelight. She leaned forward, brushing a strand behind her ear as the man across from her reached out and covered her hand with his. Alexander stopped breathing. Who is this? The question detonated in his skull, silent and violent. His jaw locked, a physical reaction to the emotional shrapnel. He tracked the man's thumb stroking her knuckles. He catalogued the easy smile on Olivia's face, the relaxed slope of her shoulders. He'd never seen her look like this, not in 2 years of 80-hour weeks, of following him through boardrooms and black-tie galas and situations that required a security detail. "Your table, Mr. Thorne?" The Mayor D appeared, voice hushed. "There," Alexander said, his voice a low scrape of gravel. He nodded to a two-top exactly 3 tables away, with a perfect sightline. Quiet. "Of course." He sat, ignoring the proffered menu. His entire focus was a laser on the scene unfolding before him. The man, early 30s, decent suit, forgettable face, said something that made Olivia throw her head back slightly, another genuine laugh escaping. Alexander's hand curled around the edge of the marble table. The visceral need to walk over, to dismantle the moment piece by piece, was a live wire under his skin. Eric Vance, his head of security and the closest thing he had to a friend, slid into the opposite chair. The contacts running 15 minutes behind, traffic on the FDR. Alexander didn't acknowledge him. His gaze was fixed. Eric followed his line of sight. Understanding dawned. Ah, Olivia's here. She's on a date. The words came out flat, devoid of all inflection. Looks like it. The man stood, murmuring something about the restroom. The moment he disappeared around the corner, Alexander was moving. "Boss," Eric's warning was a whisper lost in the ambient jazz. Olivia was studying the wine list when his shadow fell across the table. She looked up and the glass of Sancerre nearly slipped from her fingers. "Alexander," her voice was a breath of shock. "What are you—" "Enjoying your evening, Olivia?" He kept his tone cool, conversational even, but his eyes were taking inventory. The dress, the slight flush on her cheeks, the half-empty glass. "It's my night off," she recovered, straightening her spine. The professional mask snapped partway into place, but confusion glittered in her eyes. "I'm aware of the calendar, I approve it." He took a half-step closer, invading the intimate space of the table. "The question stands. It's dinner." "Dinner." He let the word hang, ripe with disdain. "With who?" "A friend." "A friend who holds your hand in a restaurant I use for confidential meetings?" His voice dropped, a private danger meant only for her. Color flushed her neck. "You were watching me. I observe everything, especially when it involves a member of my inner circle exposing themselves, and by extension, my interests, in a public forum." The corporate cover language came automatically, but the fury beneath it was raw and personal. "My personal life is not a security brief, Alexander. Anything that touches you touches my operation. You know the protocols." He saw the flash of defiance in her eyes, and it fueled the fire in his gut. "I didn't break any rules. You broke my trust." The words slipped out, stark and unvarnished. Olivia blinked, thrown. Before she could respond, the date returned. "Oh, hey," he said, pausing awkwardly. He extended a hand. "You must be the legendary Mr. Thorne. Olivia's told you you're demanding." Alexander looked at the offered hand as if it were a biological hazard. He did not shake it. The man retracted it, laughing nervously. "Right. Well, I'm Ryan." "I don't care what your name is," Alexander said, his tone so quiet it was almost gentle, the softness before the breaking point. "This dinner is over." Olivia shot to her feet. "No, it's not." Ryan shifted, a placating gesture. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble." "Then leave." Alexander didn't look at him. His eyes were locked on Olivia. "Alexander!" Her voice sliced through the tension, sharper than he'd ever heard it. The sound of his full name on her lips, laced with anger, stunned them both. A waiter scurried past, averting his eyes. Olivia grabbed her clutch, her gaze drilling into Alexander. "You don't get to control this, not tonight." She turned to Ryan, her voice softening with an apology. "Let's go." She guided a bewildered Ryan away, back toward their table. Alexander stood, rooted, a storm of something violent and terrifying swirling in his chest. It wasn't just anger, it was fear, a primal, possessive fear that tasted like copper on his tongue. He turned and walked out of the restaurant without a backwards glance. The cold night air of Tribeca hit him like a slap. Eric was at his side instantly. "The meeting," Eric began. "Cancel it." Alexander slid into the back seat of the armored Maybach. He stared ahead as the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white. His reflection in the darkened window was a stranger, a man unsettled to his core. After a full minute of silence, he spoke, his voice deadly calm. "I want a full workup on him. Name, firm, assets, associations, parking tickets, everything. On my desk by morning." Eric nodded, tapping his secure phone. "On it." The car pulled into the sleek underground garage of his building, but as the elevator ascended to his penthouse, his mind remained in that restaurant, on that laugh, on the question that now owned him. "Who is he, Olivia, and why does the thought of him near you make me want to burn the world down?" The glass and steel tower of Thorne Capital on 57th Street felt more like a mausoleum than an office the next morning. Olivia's heels clicked a hollow, too loud rhythm on the polished lobby floor. She'd replayed the scene at Le Basilique 100 times between sleepless hours, each iteration making her angrier, then more confused, then just exhausted. He had no right, none. She rode the private elevator to the 40th floor executive suite, her reflection in the brushed steel doors a study in professional armor. A tailored charcoal pantsuit, hair in a severe knot, makeup flawless. The armor felt thin. The suite was preternaturally quiet. Her desk, a sleek, white, monolithic thing stationed directly outside the floor-to-ceiling doors of Alexander's corner office, sat in perfect order. Her computer hummed to life. She avoided looking at his doors. He was always in before her, always. A control freak's habit. Today, at 7:15 a.m., his office was dark. The silence stretched, taut and unnerving. She logged in, her fingers moving on autopilot through passwords and encryption protocols. The quarterly reports for the shell company, Atlas Advisory, needed her final review. She tried to focus on the columns of laundered numbers, but her brain kept supplying the image of Alexander's face last night. That cold, cutting fury just barely contained, and beneath it something raw she couldn't name. The elevator chimed its discreet tone at 5878. Her spine straightened without her permission. She knew his footfall, measured, heavy, owning the space it moved through. He entered the reception area, Eric a half step behind him. Alexander wore a kitten suit the color of a winter sky, no tie, the first button of his white shirt open. He looked immaculate and utterly remote. His gaze swept the empty desks, the skyline beginning to brighten with morning, and finally landed on her. For a fractured second, it was all there again, the restaurant, the candlelight, her defiance. Then his eyes shuddered, becoming the impenetrable gray of smoked glass. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice perfectly calibrated, neutral. He didn't respond. He walked past her, the faint scent of sandalwood and cold air trailing in his wake. The doors to his office closed with a soft, definitive thud. Eric paused by her desk, a tablet clutched to his chest like a shield. He gave her a look that was equal parts sympathy and warning. "He's in a mood." "Aren't we all?" she muttered, turning back to her screen. Eric's lips twitched. "Just tread lightly today, Liv." He followed Alexander inside. The silence they left behind was louder. Olivia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were steady, a minor miracle. So that's how we're playing it. The Ice Age. Fine. She could do cold. She was a master of it, thanks to him. The morning bled into afternoon via a series of sterile emails and rescheduled calls. He communicated only through the internal messaging system, his directives terse and devoid of any personal signature. No summons, no biting commentary. It was the professional equivalent of being ghosted in a 20-foot room. It grated more than any argument. Finally, at 3:47 p.m., the intercom on her desk buzzed, the sound sharp in the quiet. "Olivia, my office, now." His voice was flat, stripped of all nuance. Her heart performed a single hard knock against her ribs. She stood, smoothed her blazer, and walked to the doors. She knocked once and entered. He wasn't at his desk. He stood at the window, a silhouette against the panoramic view of Central Park, hands clasped behind him. Eric sat in one of the guest chairs, a sealed manila folder on his lap. The atmosphere was dense, charged with unsaid things. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, stopping in the center of the vast room. Alexander didn't turn. He let the silence stretch, a power play so familiar it almost comforted her. This, at least, was a script she knew. "Sit," he said, finally. She took the chair opposite Eric, back straight, hands folded in her lap, the posture of an employee awaiting evaluation. Slowly he turned. He moved to his chair, but didn't sit, instead perching on the edge of the desk, looming over her. His gaze was analytical, dissecting. "Explain last night." It wasn't a question, it was a command for surrender. "I believe you witnessed the explanation. It was a personal dinner on my personal time." "Personal," he tested the word, "with a man whose background is, at present, unknown to me, in an establishment frequented by my business associates, several of whom have competitive interests." Ryan Carter is a landscape architect. He designs rooftop gardens for luxury buildings. He's not a competitive interest. He's a guy my cousin Jessica set me up with. "Ryan Carter," Alexander repeated, as if filing the name. Age 34, partner at Green Horizon Design, currently leasing a one-bedroom in Long Island City, drives a Tesla Model 3, no criminal record, 2 speeding tickets, both paid. He paused, his eyes holding hers. He investigated him. Disbelief stained her words. "I assessed a potential risk vector.
It's my job. He is not a risk vector. He's a date. A date you felt compelled to hide. His voice dropped, gaining a razor's edge. You didn't list the restaurant reservation on your weekly itinerary. You didn't notify security of a change in your evening location, standard protocol for a member of the executive team, as you are well aware. So that's what the angle was, bureaucratic entrapment. He was boxing her in with the rulebook he himself had written. The injustice of it burned. I didn't think a blind date warranted a security detail. Everything you do warrants consideration. His control in his voice frayed just for an instant. He leaned forward, the space between them shrinking. You walk out of this building, Olivia. You are seen with my drivers, my security, in my spaces. You think the people who watch me don't make the connection, that they won't see a soft target if they want leverage. That's not what this is about, she shot back, her own temper rising. This isn't about security. This is about you walking in and seeing me with someone else. This is about control. The air left the room. Eric shifted uncomfortably, studying a whirl in the oak floor. Alexander's expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw began a relentless, rhythmic tick. He pushed off the desk and stood to his full height, looking down at her. "Stand up," he said. A chill skated down her spine. She rose, forcing herself to meet his gaze. He was close enough that she caught the faint, sleepless shadows under his eyes, the tension corded in his neck. "I am responsible for the ecosystem of this organization, Olivia. You are a vital part of that ecosystem. Your judgment, your safety, your loyalties, they are my concern. You engaging in a public relationship with an unknown entity introduces a variable. I eliminate variables. That is not jealousy. That is operational integrity." Operational integrity, right. And the part where you told him our dinner was over, was that a corporate merger? His eyes darkened. "You've never pushed back like this before. You've never invaded my private life like this before."
Your private life ended the day you accepted the NDA and the seven-figure salary that comes with it. The volume didn't rise, but the intensity did, vibrating in the space between them. You knew the stakes. You knew the world this door leads into. He gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the city that hid his true business. If you're dissatisfied with the conditions of your employment, you know where the door is. The words landed like physical blows. The door, the ultimatum she'd always known was there, lurking in the fine print of the most lucrative, terrifying job she'd ever had. Her throat tightened. She swallowed hard, pushing down the swell of hurt. "Do you want me to leave?" He went utterly still. The tick in his jaw stopped. For a heartbeat, she saw something fracture in his rigid composure, a flash of pure, uncalculated panic. It was gone in a nanosecond. "No," he said, the word clipped. "I want you to think, that's all." The dismissal was clear, but the crack she'd seen gave her a sliver of maddening hope. She took a step back, her voice softening despite her anger. "I do think, Alexander, all the time, and I think you have no idea how you sound right now." He turned his back on her, walking to the window again, hands braced on the sill. A clear signal. "You can go." She left without another word, closing the door with a soft, precise click. In the sanctum of her own desk, she pressed a trembling hand to her sternum. The fight had left her shaky, but it was the look in his eyes, that fleeting, raw fear, that echoed in her bones. Inside the office, Eric released a long, slow exhale. "You want me to dig deeper on Carter? Look for leverage?" Alexander didn't turn from the window. He stared at the park, but didn't see it. He saw her face, defiant and hurt. He heard her question, "Do you want me to leave?" "No," he said, the word clipped. "Just maintain the surveillance detail on her discreetly." "Already in place," Eric said, standing. He headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "For what it's worth, she's right. You sounded jealous as hell." Alexander didn't deny it. After Eric left, he sank into his chair, the leather groaning softly.
He opened the top drawer of his desk, bypassing the contracts and encrypted burners, and pulled out a single, worn file. It was Olivia's original HR dossier. He didn't open it. He just rested his palm on the cover, as if trying to feel the pulse of the woman within the pages. On the other side of the door, Olivia's phone lit up with a text from her cousin Jessica. Jess, well, how bad was the fallout? Did the Ice King thaw enough to speak to you today? Olivia typed a reply, her thumbs tapping with furious speed. The Ice King has declared a permanent winter, and he had Ryan investigated. I think I hate him. She stared at the last sentence. A lie. That was the worst part. The fury was real. The violation was real. But the hate wasn't there. In its place was a terrifying, familiar pull, magnified 1,000 times by the sheer intensity of his reaction. He hadn't fired her. He'd investigated her date. He'd looked afraid when she mentioned leaving. Who is this guy? He'd asked last night. The terrifying, thrilling answer whispered in her soul. He's a man who's just as trapped as I am. The silence held for 3 days. It was a new, perfected form of torture. Alexander was present but absent, a ghost in a Brioni suit. He gave instructions via encrypted memo. He ate lunch in his office. He left meetings the moment she entered the room. The few times their paths crossed in the hallway, his gaze slid over her as if she were a potted plant, functional, invisible. Olivia matched him, degree for frigid degree. She became a model of ruthless efficiency, her reports flawless, her forecasts sharper than ever. It was a silent war of professional excellence, and she was damned if she'd let him win. But the victory was hollow, and the quiet ate at her. On Thursday evening, as a late spring thunderstorm lashed the windows of the nearly empty office, the dam broke in the smallest of ways. She was packing her bag, determined to leave before he emerged from his latest call, when his office door opened. He stood there, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled, looking more like the man who ran the city's underworld than the one who ran its hedge funds. "The Darlington proposal," he said, not looking at her, his voice rough from hours of use. "I need the adjusted figures from the Q1 tax implications, now." It was 8:15 p.m. The files were in the secured server, accessible only from her desktop, a task designed to keep her there. "I'll remote in from home and email them." She slung her bag over her shoulder. "No, the security protocol on that server doesn't allow for external access on new IPs after 7 p.m. You know that." Finally, his eyes met hers. They were shadowed, tired. "It will take 5 minutes." A lie. They both knew the protocol was malleable with a single phone call from him to IT. This was a test, a command. The old Olivia, the one from a week ago, would have sighed, put her bag down, and complied. The new one just stared at him, the static from the storm outside bleeding into the space between them. "Is this a business necessity?" she asked, deceptively soft. "Or is this about control?" A flicker in his gaze, surprise, then something hotter. He took a step into the reception area. Now he was close enough that she could see the faint dampness at his temples from the penthouse gym he'd doubtless used an hour ago, smell the clean, sharp scent of his soap beneath the sandalwood. The proximity was a live wire. "Then let's call it a necessity," he murmured, his voice dropping to that low, private register that always felt like a physical touch. The admission, so casually devastating, stole her breath. It wasn't an apology, it was something more primitive, a need. Without another word, she walked back to her desk, dropped her bag, and woke her computer. She felt him watch every movement as she logged in, her fingers flying across the keys. The only sounds were the rain, the hum of the server, and the heavy, waiting silence of him. "It's compiling," she said after a moment, not turning around.
He didn't reply. She heard him move, not back to his office, but to the large window overlooking the storm-ravaged park. He stood with his back to her, hands in his pockets, a statue of contained power. The file finished. She transferred it to the secure drive and stood. "It's on the Z drive, Darlington folder." He didn't turn. "Pour yourself a drink." It wasn't a question. She looked at the crystal decanter of Macallan 25 on the sidebar, a fixture in the office. Another test. "I'm fine." "You're not." He finally glanced over his shoulder. "You've been wound tighter than a spring for 3 days. So have I. 1 drink, a ceasefire." The word ceasefire did it. It acknowledged the war. It offered a temporary peace, and she was so tired of fighting. She walked to the sidebar, the expensive crystal cool in her hand. She poured 2 fingers, neat. She didn't ask what he wanted, she knew. She poured a second glass and carried both to the window, handing one to him. Their fingers brushed, a spark, simple and electric. He took the glass, his eyes on the rivulets racing down the glass. "You think I'm a monster?" The bluntness of it shocked her. She took a sip, the whiskey burning a smooth path down her throat. "I think you're a man who uses monstrous tactics to get what he wants." "And what do I want, Olivia?" He turned fully to face her now, leaning a shoulder against the cold glass. The city lights below were smeared into impressionist paintings by the rain. "You want control. You want power. You want me." The last thought was so loud in her head she was afraid she'd said it aloud. "You want to win," she said instead. "Winning is meaningless if there's no one at the finish line worth showing your trophy to." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "Ryan Carter, is he worthy?" There it was, not a security question, a personal one, the first direct hit since the restaurant. "He's kind," she said, defensive. "He's normal. He doesn't look at me like a puzzle to solve or a liability to manage." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Normal." He said the word like it was a disease. Normal men break under pressure. They leak, they run. They leave you exposed when the first real threat emerges. "And you wouldn't?" He set his glass down on the ledge with a sharp click. In one fluid motion, he closed the small distance between them. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a cage. "No," he said, the word a vow whispered in the dark. "I would stand in front of it. That's the difference between a normal man and me. I don't just want you safe when it's convenient, Olivia. I need you safe. Always. Even," he added, his gaze dropping to her lips for a heartbeat, "from me." Her heart hammered against her ribs. The air was thick with whiskey and confession. "That's not a justification for what you did." "I'm not justifying, I'm explaining." He reached out, slowly, giving her every chance to recoil. His fingers came to rest not on her, but on the window beside her head, tapping the glass. "This life, it's a series of locked doors. I've spent years building them. You walked through one, and now I can't seem to lock it behind you. It terrifies me." The raw honesty was a weapon more disarming than any threat. She saw it then, the true source of his anger, his control. Not arrogance, fear. A deep, abiding fear of the one variable he couldn't calculate, her. "So you push me away instead?" she whispered. "It's cleaner. It's cowardly." A muscle leapt in his cheek. He leaned in, his breath a warm caress against her temple. "You have no idea what I'm capable of when I'm not being a coward, Olivia." The promise, or the warning, hung in the air. The storm outside reached a crescendo, a crack of lightning illuminating his face in stark relief, all sharp angles and desperate hunger. His phone vibrated on the ledge, shattering the moment. Eric's name flashed on the screen. Alexander didn't move for a long second, his eyes still locked on hers, as if deciding whether to answer or to finally, irrevocably cross the line he'd just drawn. With a barely perceptible curse, he snatched the phone. "Vance." He listened, his expression hardening back into its customary granite mask. "Understood. I'm on my way." He ended the call and picked up his jacket from a chair, shrugging it on with practiced ease. The vulnerable man was gone, replaced by the kingpin. "There's a situation at the docks, a disagreement with a new distributor." His voice was all business again, but his eyes held a lingering heat. "My driver will take you home. Don't argue." "Alexander?" "Olivia." Her name was a command and a plea. "Get in the car, go home. Lock the door. This conversation isn't over."
He was at the elevator bank before she could respond, Eric materializing from the shadows to join him. The doors slid open, he stepped inside, and just before they closed, his gaze found hers one last time, a fierce, possessive certainty. The silent office roared in his absence. Olivia finished her whiskey in one burning gulp, her hand trembling. The situation at the docks was a euphemism for violence. It was the world he lived in, the world he was, right now, walking back into. And his last thought, his last order, had been for her safety. She gathered her things, her mind reeling. He was a paradox, a man who threatened her freedom to ensure her protection, who pushed her away to pull her closer, a monster who feared his own capacity for feeling. When the black Suburban pulled up to her West Village apartment building 20 minutes later, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The driver, a silent giant named Marcus, saw her to her door. "Mr. Thorne said to remind you." The lock. She looked at her apartment door, the old, simple deadbolt. Alexander's critique from 100 security briefings echoed in her head. A child could pick it. Inside, she leaned against the closed door, the silence of her own home feeling alien. Her phone buzzed. Not a text, an encrypted alert on the secure messaging app they used for work. It was from Alexander. A single line, sent 10 minutes prior. A.T. The new lock and enhanced security system will be installed tomorrow at 9 a.m. The crew is vetted. Let them in. No request. A statement, followed by a second message arriving just now. A.T. And Olivia. Normal is overrated. She stared at the words, a helpless, traitorous smile touching her lips. He was infuriating. He was dangerous. He was rearranging the physical boundaries of her life without her consent. And the terrible, thrilling truth was, in the heart of the storm he carried with him, she had never felt more alive.
The security crew arrived at 8:58 a.m., a trio of efficient, silent men in unmarked black polos and tactical pants. They didn't look like locksmiths. They looked like they could breach a bank vault and then calmly assess its vulnerabilities. Olivia let them in, sipping her coffee as they worked with unsettling speed. In 45 minutes, her apartment was transformed. The old deadbolt was replaced with a biometric Schlage lock with a keypad and fingerprint scanner. Sensors were installed on every window, their LEDs blinking a soft, vigilant green. A discreet, high-resolution camera now pointed at her door from the ceiling of the hallway, its feed, she was told, encrypted and monitored by Thorne Capital's off-site security hub. "It's a Level 2 residential package, ma'am," the lead installer said, handing her a key card and a sheet with passcodes. "Mr. Thorne's instructions. Any issues, you press the panic button on the key fob or use the app." She held the sleek black fob. It felt heavy. A tiny prison and a tiny fortress in one. "And if I don't want to be monitored?" The man's expression didn't change. "The feed is for your safety. Access is limited to Mr. Vance and Mr. Thorne." "Of course it is." She thanked them, her voice tight, and closed the door on their retreating backs. The apartment, her sanctuary of thrift store furniture and overflowing bookshelves, now hummed with the silent energy of a gilded cage. The lock beeped softly as she tested it, a sound that felt like approval or possession. Work was a minefield of unspoken things. Alexander was in the office before her again, but the glacial silence had thawed into something more complex, a constant, humming awareness. He didn't ignore her, he watched her. When she brought him his morning brief, his gaze tracked her from the door to his desk, a physical weight. When she spoke in meetings, he listened with an intensity that made the other VPs shift in their seats. He'd ask for her opinion, his tone neutral, but his eyes would hold hers a beat too long, as if the real question was something else entirely. It was exhilarating and exhausting. Every interaction was a layer of subtext, a negotiation of the new, fragile truce. On Friday, Jessica ambushed her for lunch, dragging her to a crowded salad place near Bryant Park. "Okay, spill. The digital silence is deafening," Jess said, stabbing a piece of avocado. "You said, 'I think I hate him,' which is sister code for, 'I am having a catastrophic emotional crisis about him.'
What did the ice dragon do now? Olivia poked at her kale. He had a military-grade security system installed in my apartment. Jessica's fork clattered to the table. He what? Olivia, that's not a romantic gesture, that's a felony waiting for a motive. That's Stalker 101. It's for protection, Olivia said, the justification sounding weak even to her own ears. From what? The crushing disappointment of dating landscape architects? Jess lowered her voice, leaning in. Liv, listen to me. The man runs a venture capital firm that, according to my finance bro X, somehow never loses money, even in a recession. He has associates who look like they bench press SUVs. He investigated your date. He's wiring your home like a CIA safe house. This is not a meet cute. This is a red flag parade. I know what it looks like. Do you? Because it looks like you're the shiny new asset he's decided to acquire and secure. Jess's eyes were wide with concern. What's the endgame here? You can't seriously be considering... Considering what? Olivia's defensiveness spiked. Him. A life inside that fortress? You wanted normal, remember? You wanted to stop jumping at shadows. Olivia looked out the window at the sun-dappled park, the normal people having normal lunches. She thought of Alexander's confession in the storm. It terrifies me. She thought of the lock on her door, a cold, hard fact. Jess was right. It was a parade of red flags. And yet, the memory of his hand near her face, the heat in his gaze when he said, "You have no idea what I'm capable of," it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise, a dangerous, all-consuming promise. I don't know what I'm considering, Olivia admitted quietly, but it's not about normal anymore. Jess groaned, dropping her head into her hands. Oh, honey, you're in deep. The universe, it seemed, had a perverse sense of timing. That evening, as Olivia was leaving work, her personal phone chimed with a text from Ryan Carter. Ryan, hey Olivia. I know things got weird. I feel like I owe you a coffee, no strings, just to clear the air. You free tomorrow? She stood in the marble lobby, the text glowing on her screen. A lifeline back to normalcy. A sane, kind man offering a simple apology. She should say yes. Her thumb hovered over the keypad. Before she could decide, a familiar, low voice spoke just behind her shoulder. A problem? She startled, nearly dropping her phone. Alexander stood there, holding a leather folio, having just stepped out of the private elevator bank. His eyes dropped to her screen. She saw his gaze register Ryan's name before she could angle it away. A cold, still mask settled over his features. The humming awareness of the day crystallized into something sharp and frozen. No problem, she said, sliding the phone into her bag. Just a text. From the architect. It wasn't a question. He's apologizing for the other night. Alexander's smile was thin, humorless. How civilized of him. He stepped closer, forcing her to tilt her head up. The lobby was emptying, but they weren't alone. His voice was a private, venomous murmur. Tell me, Olivia, does he know what kind of lock is on your door now? Could he even begin to understand why it's necessary? The words were meant to wound, to highlight the absurd gap between Ryan's world and his. They succeeded. That's not fair. Fair? He almost laughed. You're standing in the lobby of a building that houses 3 shell companies I use to move money for men who would kneecap your nice architect for looking at them wrong. You're carrying a phone that's probably been tagged by a federal task force. You're protected by a security system I paid for. Don't talk to me about fair. The brutal truth of it stole her breath. He was painting the reality of her life in stark, ugly strokes, and she had no brush to paint over it. What do you want me to do, Alexander? Her whisper was fierce. Become a nun? Live in the fortress you built and never speak to another man? I want you to understand the choice you're making. The controls snapped just for an instant, a flash of pure, unvarnished frustration. He regained it instantly, his voice dropping back to that deadly calm. Coffee is a choice, a harmless one in his world. In mine, it's a vulnerability, an opening, a signal that you're available. I am available, she shot back, her own temper igniting. I'm not your property. Something dark and dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Aren't you?" The two words hung in the air, a challenge and a confession so profound it left her speechless. He held her gaze, letting them land, letting her feel their weight. Then, as if a switch flipped, he stepped back, the corporate titan reassembling himself. "My car is outside. It will take you home." He didn't wait for a reply, turning towards the waiting town car idling at the curb. Marcus held the door open. Alexander paused before getting in, looking back at her where she stood frozen on the sidewalk. The evening sun glinted off his aviators, hiding his eyes. "Make your choice, Olivia," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the space between them. "In my world, there's no such thing as no strings attached." He slid into the car, the door closed with a definitive thud. The black sedan pulled into the chaotic flow of Fifth Avenue traffic and was gone. Olivia stood on the sidewalk, the city noise a dull roar in her ears. The weight of the security fob in her bag felt like an anchor. Ryan's text was a lifeline to shore. Alexander's words were the riptide, pulling her out to a deep, dark, thrilling sea. She got into the back of the second SUV, the one always waiting for her now. As they navigated downtown, she pulled out her phone. Her fingers were cold. She opened the text thread with Ryan. She typed a reply, deleted it, typed another. The image of Alexander's face, that raw, furious possessiveness warring with his iron control, burned behind her eyes. "He's right," a voice in her head whispered, a voice that sounded disturbingly like her own, but braver or more foolish. "Coffee is a choice, and you already know which world you're in." She took a deep breath and finalized the text. "Olivia, thanks, Ryan. I appreciate the offer, but I have to pass. Things are complicated here. All the best." She hit send before she could rethink it. The message disappeared into the digital ether, a tiny, deliberate surrender. She wasn't choosing safety. She wasn't choosing normal. She was choosing the storm. Looking out the window at the blur of the city, she realized with a jolt that she wasn't afraid. She was, for the first time in years, completely, terrifyingly awake.
Choosing the storm, Olivia discovered, did not mean the skies immediately opened. It meant living in the heavy, charged stillness before the lightning strike. The following week was a study in controlled escalation. The air between them was no longer filled with silence or barbs, but with a dense, palpable current. It hummed in the space between their desks during video conferences, sparked when their hands brushed passing a tablet, vibrated in the milliseconds of eye contact held a fraction too long. Alexander stopped pretending her life outside the office didn't exist. He started shaping it. "You'll need this for Friday," he said on Wednesday, dropping a thick, cream-colored envelope on her desk. It was an invitation to the annual Museum of Modern Art benefit, one of the most exclusive black-tie events of the spring social calendar. The ticket price was listed at $25,000 a plate. She looked up at him. He was leaning against her desk, a posture that was both casual and utterly dominating. "I'm not on the guest list." "You are now. You're attending as my representative from the Thorne Capital philanthropic arm. It's a business function." His tone brooked no argument, but his eyes held a glint that said he knew it was anything but. "A business function that requires a ball gown. Expense it." He straightened. "Pick something that doesn't make you look like a junior analyst." She almost smiled. "Any other specifications? Color? Length?" He paused, his gaze doing a slow, deliberate sweep from the knot of her hair down to her sensible pumps and back up. The look was so openly appraising it sent a flush over her skin. "I trust your judgment," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. "But if you need a second opinion, my driver is at your disposal for appointments at Bergdorf's." He walked away, leaving her staring at the invitation. It was another lock on another door, this one leading into the glittering, predatory world of high society, where his name commanded a different kind of fear. A gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. Yet the thought of walking into that room on his arm, no, as his representative, the correction was important, sent a thrill through her that was stronger than any trepidation. On Thursday, he canceled her afternoon of back-to-back calls. "We're going downtown," he announced, appearing in her doorway. "The driver's waiting." "Downtown where? My schedule is mine to manage. Come on." It wasn't a request. She grabbed her bag and followed, a familiar mix of irritation and anticipation tightening her stomach. He didn't speak during the drive to Tribeca, working on his phone, the digital glow highlighting the sharp planes of his face. The car stopped not at a corporate address, but in front of a nondescript steel-reinforced door between a boutique art gallery and a closed restaurant. Alexander typed a code into a sleek keypad. The door clicked open. Inside was not a boardroom, but a private art vault. The air was cool, dry, and silent. Rows of metal mesh cages lined the walls, but the center of the space was a stark, white-walled gallery, illuminated by perfect shadowless LED lights. On display were a half-dozen paintings, modern and severe. "One of my holding companies invests in art assets," he said, his voice echoing softly. "These are recent acquisitions. I need your eye." She walked slowly, taking in a massive, angry Rothko, a precise, chilling Richter. This wasn't an investment portfolio. This was a glimpse into his psyche, controlled, abstract, emotionally volatile, but meticulously framed. "My eye for what? Resale value?" "For what they say," he murmured, coming to stand beside her in front of a Francis Bacon triptych, all distorted flesh and existential scream. "Tell me what you see." She looked from the tortured figures on the canvas to his impassive profile. This was another test, deeper than any report. "I see violence and the unbearable effort to contain it within a beautiful frame." He went perfectly still. Then he turned his head to look at her. The sterile light hollowed his cheeks, made his gray eyes almost silver. In this secret, silent room, the masks were off. Exactly. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The hum between them crescendoed into a roar in her ears. He was showing her a piece of himself, the raw, unfiltered id he kept locked away, and asking her to name it. It was more intimate than a touch. "Why are you showing me this?" Her voice was a whisper. "Because you should know what you're choosing," he said, his gaze intense. "It's not just penthouse views and charity galas. It's this, too. The things that live in the dark, valuable precisely because they can't be shown in the light. And you keep them locked up." "I do." He took a step closer. The scent of him, sandalwood and clean linen, filled the space between them. Her breath hitched. His eyes dropped to her lips. The air grew thick, charged with the potential of a first touch that would change everything. Here, in this sterile vault, with the specters of violence and beauty watching, it felt inevitable. His phone buzzed, a harsh, insistent sound in the quiet. He didn't move, his gaze still locked on her mouth, a war raging in his eyes. It buzzed again and again, the coded pattern of an urgent alert. The moment shattered. He closed his eyes briefly, a flicker of frustration so profound it looked like pain. When he opened them, the gallery owner was back. He pulled the phone from his pocket, glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened into granite. "We have to go." His voice was all business, sharp with a tension that had nothing to do with her. "What is it?" "A complication." He was already striding for the door, his earlier vulnerability sealed away as if it had never been. The ride back to the office was silent, but this silence was different. It was taut with the unsaid words from the vault and whatever new threat the alert promised. He stared out the window, his mind clearly already blocks ahead, dealing with the complication. Back at her desk, the normalcy of emails and spreadsheets felt like a bizarre dream. She could still feel the cool air of the vault, see the stark hunger in his eyes, but the abrupt end was a cold splash of reality. His world wasn't just art and obsession, it was interruptions, it was complications that pulled him from the brink of a kiss into some unseen darkness. That night, as she lay in her bed in her newly secured apartment, her phone lit up with the secure app. Her heart leapt, thinking it was him.
It was Eric. EV. Don't leave the apartment tomorrow before 10 a.m. Maintenance scheduled for building exterior. Your floor will be inaccessible. It was a lie, a polite security infrastructure lie. Maintenance meant a threat. Inaccessible meant they were sweeping for bugs or watching for watchers. She typed back, her fingers cold. OC. Understood. What kind of complication? There was a long pause, then EV. The kind that reminds us why the locks are necessary. Don't worry, he's handling it. He's handling it. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they filled her with a cold, stark dread. This was the consequence. The beautiful, terrifying man in the art vault was also the man who handled complications in the dead of night, and her choice had tied her fate to his. The fear was real, but so was the pull. As she stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint, new hum of her new security system, she realized the two were now inseparable. The storm wasn't coming, she was in it.
The maintenance lasted until noon. Olivia spent the morning in her apartment, the new sensors, steady green lights feeling less like protection and more like the unblinking eyes of a predator. She tried to work remotely, but her focus was shattered. Every muffled noise from the hallway, every creak of the old building, was a potential complication. At 12:07, the secure app chimed. AT, clear, car downstairs in 20. No apology for the disruption, no explanation, just the resumption of order. His order. The sheer normality of the command was almost more unsettling than the lockdown. When she arrived at the office, the atmosphere was different. A low-grade tension hummed through the executive floor. The junior associates moved with brittle speed, avoiding eye contact. Eric was a permanent fixture outside Alexander's closed doors, his expression graver than usual. Alexander was in his office, on a secure video call. Through the glass, she saw him, posture rigid, face a mask of cold fury. He wasn't speaking, he was listening, and the act of listening seemed to require immense physical control. She saw the white-knuckled grip he had on his pen before it snapped in two with a sound she felt more than heard. He ended the call, threw the broken pieces into the wastebasket with a violent flick of his wrist, and looked up. His eyes met hers through the glass. The fury there was a living thing, but beneath it she saw something else, a profound, weary calculation. He gestured her in. She entered, the door sighing shut behind her. The room felt charged, like the aftermath of a lightning strike. "Sit," he said, his voice rough. She sat. He didn't. "The complication," he began, pacing behind his desk, "was a message from a rival consortium. They've been ambitious, trying to move product through ports we have an understanding with. Product, not art, not investments, the real product." "What kind of message?" "The kind that involves a warehouse fire in Bayonne and a customs agent in the ICU. He stopped, bracing his hands on the desk, leaning toward her. "They got access to a partial client list, one of our shell companies. They're testing our defenses, our responses." Her blood ran cold. This wasn't abstract danger. This was arson and attempted murder. What does that have to do with me, with my apartment? He straightened, his gaze unwavering. "The message was delivered by leaving a photograph on the windshield of one of my cars, the car you used Tuesday night." He picked up a tablet, swiped, and turned it to face her. The image was grainy, taken from a distance with a long lens. It was her leaving the building, illuminated by the lobby lights. A red digital circle was drawn around her head. The world tipped sideways. The air left her lungs. She was no longer an observer of his world, she was a target within it. "He've identified you as a potential pressure point," he said, his voice terrifyingly matter-of-fact. "This is what I tried to explain. Ryan Carter, a coffee date, a normal life. It's a fantasy now. You are visible, and in my world, visibility is vulnerability." The fear was a cold, solid mass in her stomach, but rising alongside it, hot and sharp, was anger. "So this is my fault for being visible?" "It's my fault," he corrected, a sudden shocking rawness in his tone, "for wanting you close, for letting myself need you in the room." He came around the desk, stopping before her chair. He didn't touch her, he just looked down, his expression stripped bare. "I have protocols for this, standard procedures when an asset is flagged." An asset? The word was a bitter pill. "A person I need to protect." His jaw worked. "The procedure is relocation, a safe house, new identity, immediate extraction from my orbit until the threat is neutralized." Relocation, extraction. The words sounded like something from a bad movie, but his face told her it was deadly serious. He was offering her the final, cleanest exit, the ultimate push-away. She stared at the tablet on the desk, at the red circle around her own face. This was the true cost of the art vault, of the almost kiss. Not just a complicated relationship, but a target on her back. "What's the alternative?" Her voice was surprisingly steady. He blinked, as if the question hadn't occurred to him. "There is no alternative. The protocol exists for a reason." "You're the one who rewrites rules, Alexander. What's your alternative to sending me away?" A long, silent beat passed. The calculation she'd seen in his eyes earlier returned, faster, sharper. "The alternative," he said slowly, "is to bring you closer, to make you not a vulnerability, but an integral part of the fortress. It's higher risk. It requires your complete, unequivocal trust, and your permanent immersion in my life. There's no halfway." Closer, not hidden away, but drawn into the center. It was the opposite of the safe house. It was a deeper surrender. "What would that mean?" she whispered. "It would mean you move into the penthouse. My security becomes your security, full spectrum. Your public role at my side becomes non-negotiable, not just at galas, but at every function, every meeting where my presence is required. You become so visibly under my protection that touching you would be understood as a direct declaration of war against me." He paused, his gaze searing into her. "And privately, there would be no more pretense. The door between us would be gone." Her heart hammered against her ribs. He was offering a binding merger, a total fusion of their lives, professional and personal. Safety through sheer terrifying proximity to the danger itself. "And if I say no? If I choose the safe house?" Pain flickered across his features, quickly mastered. "Then I will have Eric take you tonight. You'll have a new name, a new life far from here, and you will never see me again." He said it without inflection, but the cost of each word was etched in the tension around his eyes. "It's the right choice, Olivia, the smart one." He was giving her the out, the selfless, protective out. He was expecting her to take it. She looked from his face, etched with a grim acceptance of her loss, to the tablet with her circled image. She thought of the sterile safe house, the empty future, the permanent silence where he used to be. Then she thought of the vault, the raw truth in his eyes, the unbearable tension that felt more like life than any peace she'd ever known. She stood up, facing him. The fear was still there, icy in her veins, but it was dwarfed by the magnitude of the choice and the terrifying clarity of what she wanted. "I'm not an asset to be relocated," she said, her voice gaining strength, "and I'm not a weakness to be hidden." She took a step forward, closing the distance he'd maintained. "You showed me the violence in the frame, Alexander. You don't get to lock it away now and tell me it's for my own good." His eyes widened, a crack in his controlled facade. "Olivia, what's the protocol when the asset refuses to be extracted?" she asked, her chin lifting. He stared at her, a storm of conflict raging in his gaze, fear, hope, brutal possessiveness, and a dawning awe-struck respect. For a moment he said nothing, then a slow, dangerous smile touched his lips, the first real one she'd seen in days. It wasn't pleasant. It was the smile of a general whose most reckless gamble had just paid off. "The protocol," he said, his voice a low, intimate thunder, "is total integration." He reached out, not to pull him to him, but to take her hand. His grip was firm, warm, anchoring. "Pack a bag. You're moving tonight." The guest suite in Alexander's penthouse was a lesson in impersonal luxury. All cream tones, abstract art, and a view of the Hudson so pristine it looked like a digitally rendered backdrop. Olivia placed her single suitcase on the sleek luggage rack, the soft thud echoing in the cavernous silence. It felt less like moving in and more like being stored. Alexander stood in the doorway, having carried her bag up himself, a strangely domestic act from a man who hadn't carried anything heavier than a Mont Blanc pen in a decade. He watched her unpack the few practical items she'd brought: simple silk pajamas, a well-worn copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, her laptop. "This room has a separate climate control," he said, his voice too loud in the quiet. "The ensuite is through there. Towels are in the heated cabinet." She nodded, unfolding a sweater. "It's beautiful, thank you." A beat of awkward silence stretched between them, the tension from the car ride over, a silent 20-minute journey where he'd stared at his phone and she'd stared at the city blurring past, still hung in the air, thick and unacknowledged. "The safest room in the apartment is mine," he began, as reciting a technical manual. "The walls are reinforced Kevlar and concrete. The windows are rated level 8 ballistic glass. It has a panic room behind the wardrobe with independent oxygen supply and a dedicated satellite line." He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the wall just past her shoulder, his jaw tight. "The protocol for a breach is to go there immediately. The code is 0912. He finally met her eyes. "My mother's birthday." The sharing of the code, of that personal sliver of data, was more intimate than anything that had happened in the Arc Vault. It was the handing over of a secret skeleton key. "I understand," she said softly. He gave a short, sharp nod. "Dinner will be here at 8. He turned to leave, then paused, his hand on the doorframe. His shoulders were rigid. "Sleep wherever you feel most secure." The door clicked shut behind him. Olivia sank onto the edge of the bed, the duvet sighing beneath her. "Sleep wherever you feel most secure." It wasn't an invitation, it was a statement of fact and a test. The secure choice was the panic room next to him. The normal choice was this beautiful, empty cell. She unpacked slowly, her movements mechanical. The penthouse was a study in curated minimalism. No family photos, no messy bookshelves, no signs of a life lived. It was a series of perfect, defensive spaces. She thought of her own cozy, cluttered apartment with a sudden, fierce ache. It already felt like a lifetime ago. Dinner was a silent, surreal affair. A private chef served seared scallops and a bitter green salad on the massive concrete dining table, then disappeared back into the elevator. They ate to the soundtrack of cutlery on porcelain and the low hum of the city 40 stories below. "The security detail for tomorrow is Marcus and Chen. You'll have them from door to door. Eric will brief you on the new protocols for your commuting routes." "I know the routes. I helped design them." "They've been altered. New threat assessment." He didn't elaborate. The rest of the meal passed in similar exchanges, logistical, cold, essential. It was the merger he'd promised, being executed with the emotional warmth of a corporate takeover. Later, showered and changed into her pajamas, Olivia stood in the center of the guest room. The bed looked vast and lonely. The silence was absolute, pressed down by the weight of the luxury around her. She thought of her own cozy, cluttered apartment with a sudden, fierce ache. It already felt like a lifetime ago. She thought of the red circle around her face in the photograph. She thought of the reinforced walls down the hall. Safe was not a feeling, it was an architecture, and the most secure architecture was his. She picked up her book and her phone, took a steadying breath, and walked out into the dark, cool hallway. The penthouse was shadowed, only lit by the ambient glow of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. She found his door. It was slightly ajar. Pushing it open, she saw him. He wasn't in bed. He was standing at his own window, wearing only dark sweatpants, his broad back a tapestry of old, faint scars and coiled muscle, silhouetted against the glittering grid of Manhattan.
A half-empty glass of amber liquid sat on the sill beside him. He didn't turn. She walked in, the plush carpet muffling her steps. She placed her book on the nightstand and slid into the enormous bed, on the far side, under the covers. The sheets were cool, high thread count linen. They smelled like him, sandalwood and something uniquely, essentially Alexander. For several long minutes, neither moved nor spoke. The distance between the window and the bed felt like a canyon. Finally, she heard the soft clink of glass on concrete. He turned. In the dim light, she could see the exhaustion etched into his face, the shadows under his eyes deeper than ever. He looked at her in the bed, a silent, dark shape in his space, and something in his posture shifted, the rigid control softened by a fraction. He walked to the bed, not to his side, but to hers. He stood looking down at her, his expression unreadable. Then, wordlessly, he reached out and pulled the duvet more securely over her shoulder, his knuckles just barely grazing her collarbone. The touch was fleeting, practical, and utterly devastating. "The code," he murmured, his voice a gravelly whisper in the dark. "Repeat it back to me. 0912. He held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded, satisfied. He walked around to his side of the bed and slid in. He didn't touch her. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, a sentinel in the dark. They lay like that for what felt like hours, two parallel lines in the vast space, separated by a foot of cool linen. The intimacy was absolute in its austerity. It was in the shared rhythm of their breathing, in the unspoken agreement to face the lurking danger from within the same fortified walls, in the terrifying vulnerability of simply being together in the silent dark. Olivia eventually closed her eyes. The image of his scarred back against the city lights burned into her mind. This was the choice she had made, not for romance, but for survival, not for passion, but for a shared vigil. Just as she was drifting into an uneasy sleep, she felt the mattress dip slightly. Alexander had turned onto his side, facing her. He didn't reach out, but his presence, now oriented toward her, was a silent acknowledgement. A line of communication opened in the darkness. "I'm here," his posture said. "I know," hers answered. And in that silent, charged space between fear and commitment, the first true foundation of them was laid. Not in a kiss, but in a mutually agreed-upon siege.
The first morning in the penthouse dawned with a stark, silent awkwardness. Olivia awoke to find Alexander already gone from the bed, the space beside her cold. The faint scent of his shampoo lingered on the pillow. She found him in the kitchen, a brutalist concrete and steel affair, dressed for the day in a suit the color of charcoal smoke, making espresso with single-minded focus. "There's a biometric scanner by the front elevator," he said, without looking up as she entered. "Your prints and retinal scan were uploaded last night. You'll use it to enter and exit. It logs all activity." "Good morning to you too," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. He handed her a tiny porcelain cup of espresso, black and fragrant. "Morning." The word was an afterthought. "Eric will be here at 8. We have a packed schedule. The Darlington merger is getting pushback from their general counsel. I need you to find the leverage." It was a return to their old rhythm, but the setting made it surreal. She took the espresso, the heat seeping into her palms. "Understood." He finally looked at her, his gaze sweeping from her tousled hair to the silk pajamas she'd slept in. A flicker of something, possession, awareness, crossed his features before being banked. "You should get dressed. Marcus and Chen are downstairs." The day was a masterclass in their new, amplified dynamic. At the office, the stares were more pronounced. Her move to the penthouse wasn't public knowledge, but the change in their synergy was. She was no longer just outside his door, she was in the room, her presence a constant, quiet force. He deferred to her on logistical details with a new, unspoken weight. When a nervous junior VP presented flawed numbers, it was Olivia, not Alexander, who pointed out the discrepancy with a cool, surgical precision that made the man pale. Alexander had simply watched, a faint, approving tilt to his mouth. The unspoken question hung in the air of every conference room. What is she now? At lunch, sequestered in his office with salads, he broke the professional spell. "You handled Peters well." He was wrong. The numbers on the Singapore subsidiary were off by a decimal point. It wasn't hard. "It's not about the math, it's about the authority." He set his fork down. "They need to understand your voice carries my weight, that challenging you is as pointless as challenging me." "Is that what this is? A consolidation of power? Making me an extension of your will?" "It's a clarification of the chain of command," he corrected, but his eyes held a darker truth. "For your safety, an attack on you is an attack on the crown. The clearer that is, the safer you are." "So I'm the crown jewels now?" The analogy felt suffocating. "You're the keystone," he said, his voice low and intent. "Remove you and the arch collapses. They need to know that." The possessiveness was no longer just emotional, it was strategic, structural. He was building her into his empire's architecture, making her indispensable to its integrity. It was a form of protection that felt indistinguishable from entrapment. The tension built through the afternoon, a steady pressure cooker of unspoken things. It finally found its release point at 6:47 p.m. over something trivial. Olivia was reviewing the Darlington files at her desk in the penthouse study when Alexander walked in, loosening his tie. "The leverage on Darlington, what do you have?" "Their counsel is clean, but the CFO has a son, Ivy League, full tuition paid by a family foundation that just so happens to be funded by one of Darlington's offshore vendors. It's a bribe, thinly veiled." A genuine smile, sharp and satisfied, touched his lips. "Good, that's the pressure point. I already drafted the communication to the CFO, outlining the facts, suggesting a more agreeable stance on the merger would be wise. It's ready for your signature." He stared at the screen, then at her. The approval in his eyes cooled, hardened. "You drafted a threat letter without my explicit instruction." "You said find the leverage. I found it. Using it was the logical next step." She kept her voice even, but a spark of defiance ignited in her chest. She was tired of being a passive instrument. "The next step is mine to dictate." He came around the desk, his presence crowding her. "You don't get to pull the trigger, Olivia, not on these things. You assemble the weapon, you hand it to me. I decide when and where to fire." "Why?" She stood, facing him. The few inches he had on her felt like a mountain. "Because I might get it wrong? Or because you need to be the one holding the gun?" "Because the recoil comes back on me." The control snapped. His hand came down on the desk, not a slam, but a sharp, definitive crack that made her flinch. His chest was heaving. The raw, violent truth of his world was laid bare between them, not as a theory, but as a daily, deadly calculus. She didn't back down. She stepped into the heat of his anger. "Then teach me the real rules. Don't just hide me behind the walls and hand me a fake gun. If I'm the keystone, I need to know what kind of pressure I'm supposed to bear." The challenge hung in the air. He looked at her, really looked, seeing not just a subordinate or a treasure to be locked away, but a partner demanding initiation. The fury in his eyes bled into something hotter, more profound, a fierce, grudging respect. "You want to know the rules?" His voice dropped to a predatory whisper. He leaned in, his mouth a breath from her ear. "Rule 1, there are no rules, only consequences. Rule 2, never show your hand unless you're ready to play it to the end. And Rule 3, he pulled back, his gaze burning into hers. The most dangerous person in the room isn't the one with the loudest voice, it's the one who understands the value of silence. He was so close, she could see the flecks of silver in his storm cloud eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. The air crackled with the energy of their fight, transmuting into something else entirely. The professional, the personal, the protective, the possessive, it all fused in this single charged moment. Her defiance softened into a different kind of intensity. Her breath hitched. "Is this you showing your hand, Alexander?" A muscle ticked in his jaw. The war inside him was visible, the need to control, the desire to claim, the fear of the consequences of both. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted a hand.
He didn't touch her face. He touched a strand of her hair that had escaped its knot, tucking it behind her ear with a tenderness that was utterly at odds with the violence of his words moments before. The contrast was devastating. "No," he murmured, his thumb brushing the sensitive shell of her ear, sending a shiver down her spine. "No, this is me acknowledging the game has changed." He held her gaze for a heartbeat longer, letting the searing contact say everything the rules forbade him for speaking. Then he turned and walked out of the study, leaving her alone with the draft threat letter on her screen and the ghost of his touch on her skin. She sank back into her chair, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. The line between boss and protector, between prison and fortress, had just blurred beyond recognition. He'd drawn her deeper in, not by force, but by acknowledging her demand to be let in. The arch wouldn't collapse if she was removed, she realized with a jolt. It would collapse if she chose to walk away. He'd just handed her the blueprint to his own destruction, and in doing so, he had finally, truly acknowledged her power. The new, fragile understanding from the study didn't bring peace. It amplified the current humming between them into a constant, low-voltage buzz. They moved through the penthouse and the office like two charged particles, their orbits tightening.
Alexander began her real education. It was not in a classroom, but in the spaces between legitimate business. "This," he said one evening, pointing to a line item in a shipping manifest for their logistics subsidiary, "is the weight discrepancy. The containers are listed at 10 tons. They weigh 12. The extra 2 tons are our consulting fee for ensuring smooth passage through customs." "And if customs decides to actually scan?" Olivia asked, leaning over his shoulder in the penthouse study, her focus absolute. "They won't. The Port Authority's night manager is on retainer. His performance bonus is wired quarterly to his daughter's tuition account in Zurich." He turned his head, his cheek nearly brushing hers. "See the pattern? It's never a direct bribe. It's always a layer removed, a philanthropic donation, a scholarship, a consulting contract." She learned the language of his world: facilitation payments, market rate advisory services, family interests. She saw how the legitimate empire of Thorne Capital was woven through with dark, strong threads, creating a fabric that was beautiful on one side and brutal on the other. He was showing her the machine, gear by greasy gear. It was the ultimate trust exercise, and it was terrifying. The first test of their new dynamic came from an unexpected quarter: society. The Museum of Modern Art benefit arrived. Olivia wore a dress she'd chosen herself, a column of midnight blue Valentino, severe and elegant, with a single dramatic slit. No jewels. Alexander's eyes had darkened with approval when he saw her. "You look like you're attending a coronation," he'd said, his voice rough. "Your own." The gala was a swirl of crystal, champagne, and exquisite predation. Olivia was no longer just his assistant. She was the mystery woman living in his penthouse, the one he kept close. The stares were less curious now, more assessing. She felt like a rare painting he'd hung in his private gallery, finally unveiled. Alexander played his part flawlessly, the reclusive, powerful patron, his hand a constant proprietary presence at the small of her back. He introduced her not as his employee, but as Olivia Chen, my director of strategic operations. The title was new, invented, and it sent a clear message. It was during a lull, while Alexander was pulled into a conversation with the deputy mayor, that Lydia Vanderwoodson found her. A socialite of old money and sharper claws, Lydia was the ex-girlfriend Alexander had once, according to Eric, found too predictable. "So you're the project," Lydia purred, sipping champagne, her eyes like chips of blue ice. He always did have a thing for fixing broken things, or building them from scratch. I could never decide which was more his style. Olivia met her gaze evenly. "I wasn't aware I was a topic of discussion, Miss Vanderwoodson." Oh, darling, you're the only topic. The great Alexander Thorne finally showing a weakness. Lydia's smile was venomous. Tell me, does he still keep a gun in his bedside table, or has he moved it to the panic room now that he has something precious to protect? The casual mention of his private space, of his security habits, was a calculated attack. It was meant to remind Olivia that she was in a world where her boundaries were public gossip, and her safety was a debated topic. Before Olivia could formulate a cutting reply, a familiar, low voice spoke from behind her. "The only weakness on display, Lydia, is your lack of originality." Alexander's hand settled on Olivia's waist, pulling her back a fraction into the solid wall of his body. His tone was conversational, but his eyes on Lydia were arctic. "Still using the same tired lines, I see? You should have your script updated. The role of bitter ex is so mid-season." Lydia's composure faltered for a split second. "Alexander, I was just welcoming your new executive to our little world." "She doesn't need your welcome. She already owns the room." He didn't raise his voice, but the dismissal was absolute. "Excuse us, the director wants to discuss our donation." He guided Olivia away, his grip firm. When they were out of earshot, near a massive Jeff Koons sculpture, he stopped. "She's irrelevant," he muttered, his jaw tight. "She knows about the gun, about the panic room." Olivia's heart was still pounding from the encounter. "She knows what I allowed her to know 2 years ago. Security protocols have changed." He turned her to face him, his gaze intense. "Listen to me, that was a probe. People like her are canaries. They sense a shift in the power dynamic and they peck at it to see what happens. You held your ground. That's what matters." It felt like a warning. It was. His thumb stroked a slow, unseen arc on her back through the silk of her dress. "Consider yourself warned and initiated, the first breach of the outer wall." The ride home was quiet. The energy between them had shifted again, distilled by the public confrontation into something more concentrated. They had faced an external threat, petty but symbolic, as a unit. Back in the penthouse, he didn't go to the study. He went to the living room and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to her. "You handled her well," he said, leaning against the console table. "You didn't need to intervene." "I wanted to." He took a sip, watching her over the rim of the glass. She knew what it was, his claim, his allegiance, the end of any speculation about her role. She walked to the window, looking out at the silent, glittering city. "Lydia called me your project, something to be fixed or built." She heard the soft clink of his glass being set down, then his footsteps, soft on the rug. He came to stand behind her, not touching, but so close she could feel his body heat, his reflection in the dark glass superimposed over the skyline. "You were never a project, Olivia," he said, his voice a low vibration in the quiet room. "You were a revelation, a variable my equations couldn't account for. I don't build revelations, I survive them." She turned within the circle of his proximity, facing him. The charged space from the study, from the gala, collapsed to this single point. The hum became a roar. His eyes searched her face, the mask of the public man gone, leaving only the raw, weary, possessive truth. He lifted a hand, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw with a touch so light it was almost not there. A question. This time, she answered. She rose onto her toes and closed the final, infinitesimal distance. The first kiss was not soft. It was a confluence of pressure, a meeting of sealed fates. It tasted of expensive whiskey and surrendered control. His hand slid from his jaw to cup the back of her neck, anchoring her as his mouth moved over hers with a desperate, hungry certainty that stole the breath from her lungs. It was a claiming yes, but also a confession, a silent, tumultuous admission of everything the rules forbade him to say. When they finally broke apart, breathless, his forehead rested against hers. His eyes were closed, his breathing ragged. "Rule 4,
he whispered, his voice wrecked. "Is this finished?" She breathed back. His eyes opened. The storm in them had calmed into a deep, sure intensity. "No, Olivia," he said, his thumb stroking her cheek. "This is just the beginning." He didn't lead her to the bedroom. He simply picked her up, an effortless motion that spoke of his latent strength, and carried her there. The fortress door had been breached from the inside, not by an enemy, but by a mutual, long-awaited surrender. And as the city lights blurred into streaks of gold beyond the ballistic glass, the architecture of Us was finally, irrevocably filled with light and heat and a silence that was no longer empty, but profoundly, dangerously full.
Waking up tangled with Alexander Thorne was nothing like Olivia had imagined. There was no soft, morning-after glow. It was a visceral, bone-deep reorientation. The first thing she was aware of was weight, the solid, heavy warmth of his arm draped possessively across her waist, pinning her to the mattress. The second was silence. Not the empty quiet of the penthouse, but a dense, living stillness broken only by the slow, even rhythm of his breath against the back of her neck. The third was the scent. His sandalwood soap, her shampoo, and something new, something uniquely them, clinging to the rumpled sheets. She didn't move. The memories of the night washed over her in a vivid technicolor cascade. The hunger in his touch, the way his control had shattered only to reform around her, more intense, more focused. The whispered confessions in the dark, not of love, but of need. "You're the only quiet in my head." The sheer, shocking rightness of it all. As if sensing her wakefulness, his arm tightened infinitesimally, his hand splaying across her stomach. A low, sleep-rough murmur vibrated against her skin. "Don't." "Don't what?" she whispered. "Don't think yet." He nuzzled the sensitive spot below her ear, his stubble a delicious abrasion. "The world can wait." For a suspended hour, it did. They existed in a bubble of tangled limbs and shared breath, the fortified room feeling less like a bunker and more like a cocoon. The previous night had rewritten their code. The glances across the room now held a banked heat, a secret knowledge. The accidental touches were now deliberate, seeking. But the world, particularly Alexander's world, had a brutal way of reasserting itself. It began with Eric. At 7:30 a.m., the chime of the private elevator echoed through the penthouse. Alexander, already showered and dressed in a crisp white shirt, open at the collar, let him in. Olivia, wrapped in one of Alexander's robes, was sipping coffee at the kitchen island. Eric's gaze flicked to her, then away, his professional mask impeccable, but she saw the subtle shift, the acknowledgement of her new, solidified position. He didn't flinch at her state of undress in his boss's space. He simply accepted it as a new fact of the operational landscape. "We have a situation," Eric said, placing a tablet on the concrete counter. "The Bayonne warehouse fire. The ATF report came back, definitely accelerant, and the customs agent, Kowalski, he woke up. He's not talking to the feds, but our hospital contact says he's terrified, kept muttering about new management and cleaning house." Alexander's expression didn't change, but the air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. He picked up the tablet, scrolling. "Kellen's making his move to consolidate the port routes. He's eliminating anyone with loyalty to the old agreements." "He's also getting sloppy," Eric added, "leaving witnesses. It's a message of impunity." "It's a message of stupidity," Alexander corrected, his voice cold. "Loud noises attract federal dogs. He's bringing heat on the entire operation." He looked up, his eyes finding Olivia. "Our logistics subsidiary handles 15% of its volume through those ports. If Kellen disrupts the channels, or if the feds lock them down for investigation, we lose liquidity." He was including her in the threat assessment, not shielding her. It was a stark contrast to the man who had held her so gently an hour ago. This was the other side of the coin, the strategist, the kingpin. "Can we reroute?" Olivia asked, setting her coffee down, her mind shifting into the gear he'd been training her for.
It's costly, and it requires renegotiating terms with the cartel in Houston. They're less predictable. Alexander's jaw tightened. Kellen knows that. He's forcing me into a weaker position, or an open war. Or a third option, she said slowly. Both men looked at her. Eric's eyebrow twitched. What third option? Alexander's tone was flat, but his gaze was sharp, interested.